Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I think we'll wait one more minute to get started, kind of as we see people trickling in. Do want to encourage, everybody who's here now, feel free to drop your questions in as we go through the webinar. We'll try to answer as many of it as we can when we wrap up in the Q&A section. If we don't have enough time to cover the questions, we'll follow up with you after the webinar to make sure we answer your specific questions. And then also, just so you know, we're going to be sending out a quick email survey right after, just to see if anybody would like to kind of schedule a free strategy session with us to understand, how we could help you meet your sustainable packaging needs.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm accompanied by Garrett Wheaton and Sandeep Kulkarni to talk about transitions from plastic to paper for packaging. Our goal is to help demystify the challenges of using this tool as part of your holistic sustainability toolkit, whether it's transitioning to bio-based plastics or um, finding opportunities to transition to paper altogether. Um, Today we'll cover a few topics, including reasons to believe why is this a strategy worth focusing on, highlighting some of the barriers to adoption, presenting case studies on success stories where this has already been implemented, and providing an overview of technologies that are enabling this transition in a way that hasn't been that weren't available before. To frame our discussion for today, um, there's an increasing negative perception on plastics, whether that's coming from PFAS legislation, an understanding of the prevalence of microplastics in the environment, and also a bolstering of legislation and regulations around single-use plastics. There's strategies that we can leverage using bio-based alternatives, um, finding additives that can render packaging biodegradable. But there's also opportunities to look at materials where we have an existing infrastructure that enables packaging to be recyclable. And within that, we're focused on paper today. How can we use paper to replace existing packaging? And what exists to enable us to maintain the functionality of the packaging that we need for our consumer goods? Here at Prescouter, we work across industries and brands to assist companies with navigating challenges like this. Specific to packaging, we assist with supplier vetting and characterization, LC analyses to confirm that if we transition to a new material, that the carbon emissions are lower than the existing solution that exists, assisting with implementation road mapping. What products in our portfolio can we transition to in the short term, and then focusing on long-term strategies. And within that subset, identifying emerging innovations that can differentiate your company, both from a sustainability and consumer experience perspective. Before we dive into our webinar for today, I just wanted to take time to introduce ourselves. So my name is Daniel Morales. I'm the Technical Director of Consumer Goods at Prescouter. I'm a chemical engineer by training, focused on consumer goods innovation and strategy. So within that vein, we cover sustainability, transitioning to more sustainable alternatives, whether that's a formulation or a product design, as well as assisting with identifying market opportunities and differentiators. So with me today are Garrett and Sandeep, and I'll pass to Garrett to introduce himself.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for that. Yeah, Garrett Wheaton here, Senior Product Manager at Prescouter for consumer packaged goods. And I'm really, deeply involved day in and day out with our clients across a wide range of topics, all the way from what we're talking about today on sustainability to, maybe even entry into new markets and product expansion and innovations. Got my PhD in chemical engineering as well, also from NC State University. I'm currently based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and really, excited about today's topic I'm really looking forward to the conversation and hopefully providing everybody with, actionable insights that you can walk away with today. Sandeep, I'll pass it over to you for a brief intro.
Great. Thanks so much, Garrett and Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sandeep Kulkarni, and I have a PhD in polymer chemistry from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I've spent close to 30 years in the packaging industry, and out of that, probably about at least a good 15 to 20 years in the paper packaging field. So have an intimate knowledge of this topic, having worked in this field for a number of years. And now I'm the founder and president of Cooler Solutions, which is a consulting company focused on sustainable packaging development, business development, as well as education in the area of sustainable packaging. And I'll be chiming in along the way today to give some insights into what it takes to make the transition from plastic to paper and some of the both the challenges but also the opportunities that come along with that. So looking forward to the webinar today.
Awesome. I think we'll move on to, starting around the reasons to believe, why do we think, paper-based packaging has a reason to play into the sustainable packaging space. And, from our perspective, we're kind of seeing several reasons really to believe in the paper-based packaging. I think first and foremost, is the regulatory landscape is kind of favoring paper-based solutions. We're seeing ERP laws where there are lower fees for paper. Paper is having, easier access to recycled material, which then allows it to kind of meet recycled content mandates. And then, there are just bans on plastic and taxes there. And obviously paper can circumvent these. Next, we're just seeing a growing base of eco-conscious consumers and definitely just heightened concerns around people in general around plastic waste and pollution, thinking about microplastics and, how those are migrating into our body and affecting our health. From the environmental perspective, paper really provides several kind of clear advantages, including, it's biodegradable, it's more readily and easily recycled. There's greater access to recycling for paper, and people just recycle it at a higher rate. And then you can be produced from renewable sources that can be, sustainably managed. So we're not impacting the environment as much as we might have done in the past with paper. Then I'd say there's a component of also social proof here. There's major brands. We'll be talking about them to some of those today that are kind of leading successful transitions. And also there's really like clear benefits that can be achieved here, relative to plastic packaging. And we've seen this demonstrated by Nestlé, who for their Yes Bar was able to reduce emissions by up to 30% when switching to paper-based packaging solution for their Yes Bar product. Now, we certainly realize there are other sustainable alternatives, and I don't want to say it's a one size fits all here. But for some of the reasons we've discussed on this slide, there's some compelling reasons that you should be considering packaging within your portfolio. And maybe Sandeep here, it'd be great to hear from you, in your experience, kind of what do you see as supporting the transition to paper-based packaging, or, the reasons people are considering switching from plastic to paper. So maybe getting your thoughts on here would be great.
I think, Garrett, you touched on some of the major ones there with EPR laws becoming more and more common. One of the things we're noticing is that paper is taxed generally at a lower rate, or the fees for paper-based packaging tend to be lower compared to plastic. So there's a financial incentive for companies to make that transition. The other piece too is, I think, is that, as you said, that it is possible to achieve a lower environmental impact, not in every case, but I think you can achieve that through the proper selection of the substrate and materials and so on. And I would emphasize, like you brought up the point, is that this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are areas where I think paper-based packaging will definitely play a role, and there may be others where it may not. So each situation has to be looked at in a case-by-case basis, and I think companies have to make the right decision if they want to make this transition. So I would say, I think, but there are definitely benefits to making the shift from plastic to paper.
Yes, definitely. Daniel, anything you wanted to add in here?
Yeah, but when it comes to apples comparison, are there standards or certifications that folks can use to understand the carbon emission reduction if they take a product and they shift from a PET container to a paper-based package?
Yes, so there are actually experts or firms, LCA firms who actually can conduct these detailed life cycle assessments. I know you mentioned earlier that Pre-Scouter can do that as well. There are other experts in the area who can actually do a side-by-side comparison of package A versus package B to make sure that you're doing an apples to apples comparison. So the tricky thing with LCAs is the starting points and the boundaries have to be the same. So you really have to work through somebody who is well versed in this field. But I think if you do that, you should be able to really pinpoint that you're getting a net environmental benefit from making the switch.
With that, I think we'll switch over to then, discussing some of the clear barriers to adoption for paper-based packaging. I'll pass it to you, Daniel.
Yeah, sure. So when navigating this transition, at least from my experience consulting with companies across the CPG and F&B space, I've kind of bucketed what I see as the challenges into two groups. There's the cost and access component. So in this case, even looking at numbers from existing sources, cost, which makes sense, is the largest barrier. We're transitioning to why would we transition to something else that's more expensive? The kind of catch-22 in this scenario is because there's a lack of demand, it causes solutions that exist to stay expensive. So if there's an increase in demand for these solutions that exist, it could drive down cost while simultaneously bolstering access. Sandeep, if you had an insight here on the cost access point, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're correct that in the short term there would be a cost upcharge to making the switch, but I think the volume definitely plays a role. So as the adoption grows and there are more companies that start to use it, the cost will start to go down. The other thing I would also add is that as EPR again becomes more and more common, the fee that if there's a difference in fee between a paper package versus a plastic package, that fee could itself pay for the additional cost in a sense. So I think there could be a kind of a balance there between what a company's paying for EPR versus the cost of making that shift. So it has to be looked I think in a holistic sense.
Sure. Yeah. Toward that point, the compatibility with existing equipment, whether it's the equipment that you're running internally or with your third-party manufacturers, there's a transition cost, right, to leveraging new materials. So this does provide another barrier, but this almost coincides with the increasing access. But if we can leverage strategies to implement manufacturing processes that work with paper-based materials, both on the product side and packaging side, there could be cost savings there. Sandeep, I'll pass to you for your insights on compatibility.
Yeah, so there is definitely a learning process involved in trying to run paper on an existing equipment which is designed for plastic. And just to give you an example, for Nestle, Garrett mentioned about the Yes bar earlier. It took Nestle almost a year to really figure out all the kind of the nuances of running the paper-based packaging on the existing OEM equipment and so on. So there is a learning curve involved, but the good part of it is once you've gone through one transition, I think the converter actually can then adapt to it pretty quickly. So once a certain number of companies have gone through it, I think the converters will start to realize, okay, this is what it takes to run this package. So I think the first mover always has the hardest time, but I think as things get more and more common, it becomes easier to kind of make that happen. Also, I think you can play around with the substrate and all that to make things easier to run on the equipment. So again, it's I think a little bit of a learning process, but it takes somebody to initially go in that direction to get that learning.
What I'm calling lack of expertise, or uh, it's uh, paper packaging and the biodegradable or sustainable polymer solutions to act as coatings um, to provide the functionality for paper packaging. It's a fast-moving field. So many times with clients, it could simply be a lack of expertise or knowledge on what's available and how those materials could substitute existing packaging strategies. This could simply be a lack of in-house knowledge or an overall idea of what your suppliers can give you in this space. So, and easy first step is talking to your own supply chain to see what exists. And of course, always, understanding what's emerging that could um, replace existing packaging solutions. On the next slide, again, within the barriers to adoption, it's the technical challenges. Packaging serves an important function, especially for food or materials that are sensitive to moisture, oils, oxygen. There are many solutions that are at scale or near scale that can meet the barrier properties that are necessary on that can line a paper solution. So within this idea, how can you triage what are the products in your portfolio that this transition makes the most sense as a pilot, and then moving toward more complex packaging solutions. And we have a few examples that we will share. But before we go to those examples, just wanted, Sandeep, if I missed anything regarding the technical challenges that you wanted to highlight.
I mean, I think the key thing with paper is that it's basically a very open structure, so it really doesn't keep any gases or anything out. So you really do need a barrier layer in addition to the paper to make the packaging more effective. The one thing that I think in the short term companies have done is actually used a thin layer of polyethylene along with the paper. So it's not truly an all paper solution, but it gives you actually the access to use paper in a particular situation and still be able to recycle it, because with a smaller amount of polyethylene, it's still recyclable in a typical paper mill. So while you're making the transition to some of the more innovative and bio-based coatings and so on, that might be a shorter term approach for companies to kind of get into this area.
We'll move over then to covering some recent case studies that we've been seeing in the space. So I think one of the first recent events we wanted to highlight was Mark and Spencer trialing a paper-based packaging for one of their top-selling vanilla fudge bars. And I think really, what's interesting about this is to see a company, believing, so much in the value of paper-based packaging that, they're willing to do it on one of their top-selling products. And we're actually seeing them, expanding this to other products now as well. So really neat to see somebody going all in on it for one of their top products. Now the motivation. Why did M&S switch and do this? There's a couple reasons the company's given that they switch from plastic to paper. And I think one of the main drivers here that they were discussing was, their customers really deeply care about reducing plastic. So this kind of move allowed M&S customers to know that they can make sustainable choices, when shopping with M&S. And I think we've seen that a lot, how much is the consumer drive behind packaging and switching to sustainable packaging in general? Do people really want it? And here, I think M&S's customer base really spoke to them and said this is something that they want. And you can see M&S taking an actionable item on that. Um, then not only did that, the paper is allowing their product to be more easily recycled. You get better access to paper recycling and just generally higher recycling rates. So, compared to maybe other plastics, you'd have better recycling rates, and then you could put more back into the system to then boost recycled content. Also, you're seeing that the reason here for them was to, significantly reduce their plastic waste. They've estimated that over the next 12 months, this switch just for this product line is going to save 1.4 million units of plastic waste being entered into the system. So a pretty substantial savings here. And then, if you think about them starting to expand this out to all their product lines, you could start seeing massive reductions in plastic waste. And again, that's going back to meeting, the needs of their consumers and the concerns. And then just overall, this is kind of a broader thing of M&S's ESG goals to really help them kind of meet their plastic reduction targets long term. And Sandeep, I think maybe we touched on this prior slide, but really wanted to, for this kind of product where you think about, barrier properties are going to be pretty important. How is a company like this able to, offer a packaging like this while maintaining those kind of barrier properties?
So I'm not really privy to all the, or the exact structure that they use, but my guess would be as a starting point, they might have used, as I said, maybe a thin layer of polyethylene as a barrier. There are examples like with the Nestlé situation, they used a layer of or a coating of PVDC, which gives a really good moisture barrier as well as oil barrier. So there are different types of coatings that people are looking at that can provide that required level of barrier. And as I said, there's more and more work going on more renewable and bio-based coatings to move away from plastic-based coatings.
And then is there anything that, other kind of case studies similar to this that you're seeing, or, reasons you're really excited about developments like this?
Yes, I think I'm almost on a kind of a daily basis. I'm seeing examples of either converters or paper producers or even brand owners who are introducing paper-based packaging to replace plastic. So Billerud-Korsnäs has announced a line of pouches that are heat sealable and are based on paper. Mars has switched to paper-based packaging for some of their candies and so on. I think I've seen in Australia, Kit Kat, which is again a Nestlé brand, has actually switched to paper-based packaging. So there's kind of a broad range of companies that are looking at making the switch. So all the way from the brand owner to a paper producer. A lot of people working on this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something we've seen too. There's, some momentum building behind this paperization trend, and, adding to that social proof that, there is this building where people are doing it. We can do this if it makes sense for, your particular product. So I think it's something we all should be aware of, this kind of building trend around paperization. Okay. The next case study we wanted to highlight, really, we've seen a major move by two significant battery brands, Duracell and Energizer, and they're essentially moving their traditionally plastic blister packaging that you might see on a battery shelf in a store to an all paper-based solution. No, I think what's really amazing about this transition is not only that, Duracell and Energizer are finding a way to improve the sustainability of their packaging, but they're actually also offering some tangible benefits to consumers and their retail partners with this switch. So you're getting a marrying of sustainability with consumer retailer kind of benefits. And really for the consumers, this packaging is a bit easier to open. I'm sure we've all been frustrated with trying to open batteries, spills all over the place. So that's kind of what this packaging is also solving, making it easier to open, and then the batteries don't spill out all over the place when you open it up. Um, and then for their retail partners, this new packaging is actually more space efficient and easier stocked on shelves. So it really improves stocking efficiency for their retail partners. So, we're talking about, we normally when we think about this, yes, we just want to do this for sustainability, but there also could be benefits to resolving consumer pain points by reevaluating your packaging and taking a look at what paper-based packaging could do here. Um, there are other definitely motivations behind this, and a lot of them relate to that sustainability. Reducing plastic waste and greenhouse gas emissions. Duracell is estimating that their Walmart rollout alone is going to reduce packaging waste by almost 850,000 pounds and reduce, CO2 emissions from landfills per year at 170 metric tons. So, significant benefits, sustainable benefits here. And this is just related to one rollout with one retailer. If we start seeing Energizer and Duracell rolling this out across more retailers globally, the impacts are going to go up. Sandeep, I didn't know if there's anything around this one that, particularly excited you around the packaging design or, the shift to sustainability for some of these products that maybe don't have the need for the barrier performance component.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a natural fit in a sense because, like you said, Garrett, there's no real need for like a high moisture barrier or oxygen barrier and so on. So I think it's in that sense a relatively straightforward switch. The one thing obviously you want to make sure is that ensuring that you're preventing theft or pilferage and all that. So you have to kind of you might need to build in some additional features to ensure that the theft protection is maintained. But I think otherwise it's quite a natural transition from plastic to paper here.
Definitely. And that's kind of what we see and what we're, envisioning here is, where are the easy wins within your packaging portfolio that you can switch over to a more, a paper-based solution, move away from plastic, and kind of get some of those easy wins under your belt before maybe moving on to more difficult product offerings. All right, with that, I think we'll pass back over to Daniel to cover some enabling technologies.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, as we wrap up today, I wanted to highlight two groups of enabling technologies that are worth considering as if you think about why switch back from plastic to paper for the particular product packaging. To start off, we'll talk through innovations just in paper manufacturing itself, and then a brief discussion on how AI can be leveraged and how it's already being leveraged to optimize finding alternatives for packaging solutions. So with that, I'll pass to Sandeep to talk about recent innovations in paper manufacturing that make this transition more amenable.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Daniel, because sometimes when people think of using paper, they think of cutting down trees and destroying forests and those type of things. But there's been a lot of developments in the paper industry that have made it a much more sustainable option. So one thing is traditionally paper mills have been viewed as damaging to the environment, but more and more paper companies are now becoming more environmentally friendly. They've reduced their emissions, reduced the water that they're discharging, using less energy or using more renewable energy. So a lot of the leading companies, paper companies, have actually made big strides in their sustainability in terms of their manufacturing facilities. Also, a lot of paper companies, especially in the developed countries and developed regions of the world, are more and more are practicing what's called sustainable forestry, which means they're not cutting down clear-cutting trees and not replacing them. So for every tree they cut down, they are able to plant trees, and so they manage the forests in a very sustainable way. So it's not a threat to the forests. And the third thing that's I think becoming more and more common is the use of agricultural waste. So especially in developing countries where there is a lot of agriculture, you can use things like sugarcane bagasse, rice straw, or wheat straw, or other types of agricultural waste that's left over after the harvesting, and that's becoming more and more common as a source for pulp and paper, so that you don't have to rely necessarily on wood as an option for making paper. So there's a few different things in the works here that are making it more environmentally friendly to use paper. One quick thing I want to mention is there was a recent deep dive report by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that went into this topic of switching from plastic to paper. And they estimate that about 15% of all packaging applications could be switched to paper without causing a lot of forest loss of forestry and so on. And I think that's something that might be worth posting on your website or sharing with the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much for those insights, Sandeep. You know, on the manufacturing side, this is enabling more sustainable paper sourcing. And then on the back end, and we can switch to the next slide. The leveraging computing tools, particularly AI, we know it's really limited by our imagination, but I did want to highlight two examples where we've seen how machine learning can be leveraged to optimize packaging. On the first case, it's inputting data you have on performance of packaging as a function of technical parameters to optimize what materials, where can we lightweight, where can we change materials perhaps to a more sustainable solution, whether that's bio-based on the beginning of life or a biodegradable solution that maintains the barrier properties that are necessary for the good that's inside the packaging. More exploratory, using AI to imagine or create new ideas of how a product can be packaged that we haven't thought of, that still maintains the necessary functionality but reduces our burden on carbon emissions, and transition costs or transporting costs. There were two companies I wanted to highlight here that I thought were great examples that exemplify these ideas. So 1.5, they offer solutions specifically to replace plastic with a paper alternative, but they also provide consulting services to analyze the package that you're using and determine and optimize an alternative solution. So that's more on the design front. Pack size is interesting, and they're leveraging AI to optimize the size of the package that's necessary to fit the components that are used for shipping. So again, all in reducing materials used and saving emissions. One case study I wanted to highlight that exemplifies this transition from plastic to paper. If we can go to the next slide. Is actually an Amazon case study where they leveraged AI to explore opportunities to transition from whether that's a plastic-based wrap or package to a paper alternative, while also optimizing the size of the package to reduce emissions, transportation costs, etc. I think this is a great example to highlight the benefits that can be enjoyed by making this transition, and also just highlighting, large entities in the consumer goods space that have already leveraged AI to make this transition. So with that, we will go to the next slide to kind of summarize what we've learned today, and I'll pass it back to Garrett. So as we look forward and take stock of what we've discussed today, we're hoping that you leave with some tangible, actionable insights on how to think about and implement this transition. On this slide, we've bucketed a strategy based on three pillars. First, identification. What products make sense to focus on to have easy wins for this transition? That could be based on both functionality as well as cost, and accessibility to the product. Then implementation. Is this a monomaterial? Is it a hybrid solution? Are your suppliers familiar with the processing required, or do they have the materials readily available? And then considering the true offset of emissions, or the benefit of transitioning to something that's sustainable. Is it biodegradable? Is it compostable? Will the packaging be easy for the consumer to put into the recycling machine or into the recycling bin, and the infrastructure exists for recycling? There's also a consumer education component. Will consumers understand the benefit of this transition to a new packaging, and will they know how to properly dispose of that package? But before we move on, Sandeep, I'll pass to you on your final insights on the best implementation strategy.
Yeah, so the one point that I would really emphasize on, and I think it's just an overarching consideration across all these different points, is the collaboration across the entire supply chain. I think that is absolutely critical for a successful transition from plastic to paper-based packaging, because as we talked about earlier, most of the current equipment, the current infrastructure is sort of set up for running plastic-based packaging, especially in flexible pouches and so on. So making a switch from plastic to paper requires a brand owner has to collaborate with their paper suppliers, their converters, kind of the whole supply chain to make this successful. And that's exactly what Nestlé did when they first worked on this. And I think some of the other examples we provided also are good examples of how the whole supply chain was involved in this process. So I think that is, again, I can't emphasize that enough. And I think traditionally that's not been the case. Things have been working in silos, but I think for this type of a process, that collaboration is absolutely a must.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. As we wrap up for today, just wanted to highlight our contact information is provided here. If you want to continue this conversation with either of us, always happy to follow up. And with that, we would like to answer a few questions from the audience. So I'll pass to Garrett.
Great. Yeah, I think we had a couple of questions come in during the webinar as we were going through things. Sandeep, we're seeing somebody asking, they oversee a line, couple product lines where barrier performance is critical, that moisture, oxygen. Can paper-based packaging be applied here? If not, kind of what innovations do you see in the pipeline to help resolve these? I think we've touched on these, but it'd be great to refresh on that answer.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I think paper by itself doesn't have any barrier. So you definitely need another layer of a barrier material in contact with it. And that could be, as I alluded to earlier, could be a thin layer of polyethylene as a starting point. But kind of going forward, there are new materials that are coming into play. So that whether it's bioplastics or water-based barrier coatings, there's some work going on even metallization of paper. So to put a maybe thin layer of metal or something like that to get a additional barrier. So I think there's a lot of ongoing work, and we can see more and more innovative materials and coatings come down the line. So a very rich area for innovation here.
Great. Another one that's coming in from the audience would be, how do you ensure the raw materials for paper and pulp have actually been sustainably sourced? If I'm a brand owner, how do I know that, the paper is actually sustainably sourced and I can rely on that as far as the supply chain?
That's a great question. There are actually protocols and procedures in place to ensure that, and there are certifications that paper companies actually can obtain. There is one that's worldwide recognized worldwide called FSC, or Forest Stewardship Council. It's a very high, like I said, very highly recognized recognition to ensure that the forests are managed in a sustainable way, and then the wood from that, as it goes through the paper mills and so on, it's tracked all along the way through a chain of custody type of audit, so that the final user of the paper can be sure that it's coming from sustainable forestry and sustainably managed forests. So there are mechanisms in place that companies can use to track and ensure this.
Yeah, and then just layering in additionally there, also thinking about, other generation sources of fiber, and then, waste materials as well. I think Sandeep, you kind of mentioned that earlier in the call, sourcing from waste products to get the fibers for making paper.
Right.
Is that another kind of good option as well?
Yes, yes, I think there's more and more of that happening. Again, there's ways to track and trace that as well. There are companies that can actually ensure that the fiber is coming from agricultural waste and not from like the primary crop or something. So again, ISCC and some of the other organizations can actually help you ensure that that transparency is in place.
Great. Um, and I think this next question is kind of related to the first one around the barrier performance, but are there bio-based or kind of compostable coatings that have shown promise for replacing some of maybe the plastic coatings we're currently using to get the barrier functionality with the paper-based packaging, and particularly thinking about those that could be applied to that flexible packaging?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work going on materials like, I mean, of course, PLA has been around for a little while, and companies like PepsiCo and so on have used PLA in their packaging. But more and more new materials like PHA, which is a bacterially derived polyester, that's becoming of great interest. So there are new bioplastics, and then as you mentioned in one of the earlier slide, Garrett, there's like nanocellulose and things from seashells like chitin and algae-based materials that people are looking at. So there's kind of a wide range of bio-based options that are coming into play. You just have to kind of make sure that you're getting the right combination so that you're able to obtain the right barrier properties.
Okay. Next question from the audience. Kind of given the size of some of these bar-based packaging that they were seeing during the call, will these actually get recycled? And I think this is something that we've also seen as well with the stick sachets for powdered drink mixes. These things can fall out of the recycling stream. What's being done, Sandeep, to really kind of help ensure that the recyclability is happening for paper on these small packaging situations?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct there, Garrett, that some of the smaller packaging, it's very difficult for it to make it through the MRF system. And it's the same thing with plastics. If you think of a small plastic bottle, that actually falls through the screens and so on. So there is a work going on the material recovery facility side to kind of recover some of these small packages and ensure that it actually goes back into the recycling stream. Of course, what you could do is you can adjust the size of the package slightly so that it meets the requirements. Like for plastic, it's like a 2 inch by 2 inch size. That is the minimum that will actually go through the process. Anything smaller than that will be lost. So there might be opportunities to adjust maybe the size a little bit to ensure that it meets that requirement. But again, I think there's more innovations going on on the MRF side as well to recover some of those. So we can expect that in the coming years, there'll be more smaller packages that can be recovered.
Okay. And I think the last question we have time for today, somebody's asking on the line, we were talking about the regulatory pressures, kind of what do you see, Sandeep, from this audience member as kind of the main key regulatory drivers pushing people towards paper-based packaging? And then do you see, this varying by like region?
I mean, again, I think it comes down to most of the regulatory or the APR programs are focused on increasing recycling rates. And when you look at some of these multi-layer plastic pouches or single-use plastic type of materials, those are not typically not recycled. So I think that's a big driver towards the shift towards paper. So then you're able to reduce your APR fees and taxes and so on, and also be able to meet regulatory requirements. So different states in the US and then also overseas, there's a big push to eliminate single-use plastic. So I think so paper can play into some of those areas as a beneficial tool to meet the requirements.
Great. Well, I think everybody, we're up on time today. I really appreciate everybody attending the webinar. Big thanks to Sandeep for joining us today and providing his insights. As Daniel mentioned, feel free to follow up with us, and as I know we've got a couple of questions coming in, we'll get to you guys after the call. Again, really hope everybody had a wonderful day at the webinar, enjoyed the conversation, and learned something. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.